What happens when you dedicate your entire career to building something extraordinary, only to have your competence questioned by someone who's never walked in your shoes? Imagine standing in a courtroom, your reputation hanging by a thread, as a judge with zero business experience declares you fundamentally unqualified to run the very company you built from nothing. How would you feel? What would you do? The silence in that courtroom was deafening. For CEO Michael Harrington, it wasn't just about the multi-million-dollar lawsuit anymore. It was about something far more personal. His legacy, his dignity, his life's work being dismantled by someone who couldn't possibly understand what it took to build an empire. Unqualified, the judge had said, the word echoing off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot. The press scribbled frantically, already, crafting tomorrow's headlines. Michael's attorneys shifted uncomfortably beside him, but Michael himself, he remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. What the Honourable Judge William Peterson didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Michael Harrington had been underestimated. And those who had made that mistake before, they weren't judges anymore. They weren't anything anymore. Because when you corner someone who has spent their entire life overcoming impossible odds, you don't create a victim. You create something far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This is the story of how one man turned a public humiliation into the most brilliant corporate chess move of the decade. A story about power, perception, and the high-stakes game that unfolds when justice and business collide. By the time this was over, that same judge would be forced to eat his words in front of the entire world. And Michael Harrington, he was about to remind everyone exactly why he became CEO in the first place. What happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, justice, and what happens when you push the wrong person too far. To understand the depth of the injustice Michael Harrington faced, we need to rewind the clock. 25 years ago, he wasn't a CEO. He was a college dropout with a dream and a garage full of computer parts. While his peers were chasing degrees, Michael was soldering circuit boards, fueled by instant noodles and an unshakable vision of the future. For years, he worked 18-hour days, sacrificing everything, relationships, health, even his own youth, to build Technova from the ground up. He wasn't just the founder, he was the first coder, the first salesman, the first to arrive, and the last to leave. When investors laughed him out of boardrooms, calling his ideas unrealistic, Michael didn't give up. He refined, adapted, and pushed harder. Slowly, painfully, Technova grew. From a team of 1 to 10, then 100, then 1,000. Each hire felt like family to Michael. He knew their names, their stories, their dreams. This wasn't just a company, it was a revolution in the making. But success breeds jealousy, and with Technova's meteoric rise came the wolves. Competitors tried to poach his talent. Tech giants attempted hostile takeovers. Through it all, Michael stood firm, protecting his vision and his people with the ferocity of a parent defending their child. Then came the lawsuit. A disgruntled former employee, backed by a rival tech company, claimed Michael had stolen the core technology that made Technova a billion-dollar empire. It was a baseless accusation, a transparent attempt to destabilize the company. But in the world of high-stakes tech, perception is reality. The media pounced. Overnight, Michael went from being hailed as a visionary to being painted as a fraud. Editorials questioned his integrity. Industry experts dissected his every decision. The court of public opinion had already convicted him before a single piece of evidence was presented. Enter Judge William Peterson. Known for his hardline stance against corporate corruption, Peterson seemed to have made up his mind about Michael from day one. In pre-trial hearings, he repeatedly cut off Michael's attorneys, dismissing their arguments with thinly veiled contempt. But it was during the opening statements that Peterson crossed a line that shocked even the most seasoned courtroom observers. As Michael's lead counsel was outlining his client's journey from garage startup to tech giant, Peterson interrupted. Mr. Harrington's rags to riches story, while quaint, is irrelevant. the judge declared, his voice dripping with disdain. What's relevant is whether he's qualified to lead a company of this magnitude, and from what I've seen, he appears fundamentally unqualified for the role. The courtroom fell silent. Michael's attorneys exchanged panicked glances, but Michael himself remained motionless, his eyes locked on Judge Peterson. In that moment, something shifted. The air crackled with an almost tangible tension. For Michael, this wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or qualified enough to chase their dreams. It was about the arrogance of those in power who think they can crush innovation and ambition with a gavel and a sneer. As he sat there, absorbing the judge's words, Michael thought about all the late nights, the missed birthdays, the relationships sacrificed on the altar of his vision. He thought about the thousands of employees who depended on him, the families supported by the company he built from nothing. And in that moment, something inside Michael Harrington, something that had been dormant for years, hidden beneath layers of corporate politeness and PR-friendly smiles, awakened. It was the same fire that had driven him to prove everyone wrong when he started Technova, only now it burned hotter, fueled by years of accumulated wisdom and resources. Judge Peterson had no idea what he'd just unleashed. He thought he was putting an upstart in his place. In reality, he was about to become a footnote in the most spectacular comeback in corporate history. Michael Harrington was many things, but unqualified? That was a mistake the honourable judge would soon regret more than any ruling in his entire career. That night, after the devastating court session, Michael sat alone in his penthouse office. The city lights sprawled below him like a circuit board, pulsing with the energy he once felt coursing through his own veins. Now he felt only a hollow exhaustion. The judge's words, fundamentally unqualified, echoed in his mind, a relentless, mocking chorus. For the first time in decades, Michael Harrington poured himself a drink before midnight. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it, contemplating how quickly a life's work could be threatened. Technova's stock had already dropped 12% on the news of the judge's comments. Investors were calling emergency meetings. The board was getting nervous. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he left the courthouse. 97 missed calls. 238 unread messages. Everyone wanted answers he didn't have. Everyone needed reassurance he couldn't provide. For once, the man who always knew what to do next felt utterly lost. Michael walked to the wall of windows and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. 25 years of sacrifice stared back at him in his reflection, the premature grey at his temples, the deep lines around his eyes, the slight stoop in his once proud shoulders. Had it all been for nothing? Could one biased judge really dismantle everything he'd built? "Sir?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant and concerned. "Your daughter is here. She's insisting on seeing you." Michael closed his eyes. Sophia, his brilliant, headstrong daughter who had chosen a career in journalism over joining the family business. They hadn't spoken properly in months, not since their argument about her exposé on tech industry ethics. What could she possibly want now? To witness his downfall firsthand? To gather material for her next hard-hitting piece? "Send her in," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. When Sophia entered, Michael barely recognized her. Gone was the defiant fire in her eyes, replaced with something he hadn't seen since she was a little girl running to him after falling off her bike. Concern. "Dad," she said simply, crossing the room to stand beside him at the window. "I saw what happened." Michael turned away, unable to face her. "Come to document the fall of the mighty. Your readers would love that story, I'm sure." Sophia didn't take the bait. Instead, she placed a manila folder on his desk. "Actually, I came because of this." Curiosity overcoming his pride, Michael opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, financial records, and court documents. As he scanned the pages, His exhaustion gave way to disbelief, then to a slow-burning anger. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a journalist, Dad. I follow leads, and when I heard about Judge Peterson's comments, something felt off. So I started digging." Sophia's voice grew stronger. "Peterson has financial ties to Vortex Tech, your biggest competitor. The same company backing the lawsuit against you." Michael flipped through the documents, each page revealing deeper connections. Judge Peterson had received consulting fees from a shell company linked to Vortex Tech's CEO. His brother-in-law sat on their board, and most damning of all, Peterson had met privately with Vortex Tech's legal team just days before the trial began. "This is a clear conflict of interest," Michael said, his mind racing. But why would Peterson risk his career on such an obvious bias? Sophia pointed to the last document in the folder. "Because it's not just about money. Vortex Tech is developing military-grade AI technology that requires regulatory approval. Approval that would come much easier with Technova out of the picture and your patents up for grabs." For several minutes, Michael stood motionless, absorbing the implications. Then, something shifted in his expression. The defeated slump of his shoulders straightened. The clouded uncertainty in his eyes cleared, replaced by a crystalline focus. "Thank you," he said to his daughter, truly seeing her, for the first time in years. "But why help me? I thought you were done with the corrupt tech world." "Your words, as I recall." Sophia's expression softened. "I'm critical of the industry, because I believe it can be better. And despite our differences, I know you built Technova to make a difference, not just a profit." She paused. "Plus, no one gets to call my father unqualified. Not even a judge." In that moment, Michael made a decision. He wouldn't just fight back, he would redefine the battlefield entirely. Judge Peterson thought he was dealing with a typical CEO, concerned only with quarterly reports and shareholder value. He was about to discover the man behind the title, the same relentless innovator who had transformed a garage operation into a global powerhouse. Michael picked up his phone and made a single call. "Janet, cancel all my meetings for the next 48 hours and get me Daniel Chen from legal, Sarah Moss from PR, and that ethical hacker we hired last year. What's his name? Ravi?" "Yes, Ravi Mehta. Tell them to meet me here in 30 minutes. As he hung up, Michael turned to his daughter with a gleam in his eye that she hadn't seen since childhood, the look he had when explaining his first breakthrough invention. "Sophia, would you like to see how your old man earned his qualifications?" The courtroom fell silent as Michael Harrington approached the witness stand. For the past 3 weeks, he had sat quietly at the defense table, watching Judge Peterson systematically dismantle his reputation. But today, everything would change. "Mr. Harrington," his attorney began, "could you please tell the court about your educational background?" Michael leaned toward the microphone. "I dropped out of college after my sophomore year." Judge Peterson smirked, making a note on his legal pad. The gesture wasn't lost on the jury, or on Michael. "And yet," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength, "I hold 17 patents in quantum computing. I've published in peer-reviewed journals despite having no formal credentials. And before founding Technova, I worked as a consultant for DARPA on classified projects I still can't discuss." The judge's pen stopped moving. "Mr. Harrington," his attorney continued, "could you explain to the court why you believe Judge Peterson should recuse himself from this case?" The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Objection! This is outrageous!" "I'd like to hear the answer," came a new voice from the back of the courtroom. All heads turned to see Chief Justice Eleanor Ramirez of the State Supreme Court standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 judicial clerks. She moved forward with measured steps. "Your Honor," Michael's attorney said, addressing the Chief Justice, "we filed an emergency petition with the Supreme Court yesterday evening based on evidence of judicial misconduct." Judge Peterson's face drained of color. "This is highly irregular." What's irregular, Chief Justice Ramirez interrupted, is the evidence my office reviewed last night. She turned to Michael. Please continue, Mr. Harrington. Michael nodded, then reached into his suit jacket and removed a flash drive, holding it up for the courtroom to see. 3 days ago, my daughter, an investigative journalist, discovered financial connections between Judge Peterson and Vortex Tech, my company's main competitor. But that was just the beginning. Michael's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with intensity as he addressed the jury directly. I could have simply filed for recusal, but I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every entrepreneur who's ever been told they don't belong in the room. Every innovator who didn't have the right degree or the right connections. He turned to face Judge Peterson. So instead, I did what I've always done when faced with impossible odds. I innovated. Michael nodded to his attorney, who activated a projection screen. On it appeared a series of emails between Judge Peterson and Vortex Tech's CEO, dated just weeks before the trial began. These communications show more than a conflict of interest, Michael explained. They reveal a coordinated effort to use this courtroom to gain access to Technova's proprietary technology, specifically our quantum encryption algorithms that Vortex Tech has failed to replicate. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Chief Justice Ramirez called for order, but the most damning evidence, Michael continued once silence returned, came from Judge Peterson's own chambers. Another document appeared on screen, a draft ruling, already prepared, finding against Technova and ordering the company to surrender its patents as part of the settlement. This ruling was drafted before a single witness testified, Michael said quietly. The outcome was predetermined. Judge Peterson stood abruptly. These documents are fabricated. This is a desperate attempt by a man who knows he's losing. Michael smiled for the first time since the trial began. I thought you might say that, Your Honor, which is why I didn't just rely on documents. He nodded again to his attorney, who pressed play on a video. The screen showed Judge Peterson in his chambers, meeting with Vortex Tech's CEO. Once we get access to Harrington's encryption algorithms, the judge said on the recording, the military contracts are as good as yours. Just make sure my consulting position comes with the stock options we discussed. The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the doors. The prosecutor sat frozen in disbelief. And Judge Peterson, the man who had called Michael fundamentally unqualified, collapsed back into his chair, his career evaporating before his eyes. Chief Justice Ramirez banged her gavel repeatedly until order was restored. This court is now in recess. Judge Peterson, you will surrender your credentials to the bailiff immediately. Mr. Harrington, your legal team's petition for dismissal will be granted, with prejudice. As the courtroom began to empty, Michael remained at the witness stand, watching Judge Peterson being escorted out by court officers. Their eyes met briefly. The judge's filled with hatred, Michael's with something more complex than triumph. Later, as Michael exited the courthouse, a swarm of reporters surrounded him. Mr. Harrington, how did you obtain those recordings? Did you know about the judge's corruption from the beginning? What happens to Technova now? Michael raised his hand for quiet. The crowd fell silent, cameras flashing. 25 years ago, I was told I wasn't qualified to compete in the tech industry because I didn't have the right degree. 15 years ago, I was told I wasn't qualified to lead a company because I didn't have the right pedigree. And 3 weeks ago, I was told by a judge that I was fundamentally unqualified for the role I created. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. But here's what I've learned. Qualifications aren't granted by institutions or authorities. They're earned through persistence, innovation, and integrity. Judge Peterson thought his law degree and his position gave him power over me. What he failed to understand is that true power comes from creating something of value, not from trying to steal what others have built. A young reporter pushed forward. But how did you know to investigate? The judge! How did you get those recordings? Michael smiled. When you've spent your life being underestimated, you learn to prepare for every contingency. I've had a team monitoring judicial conflicts of interest since the day this lawsuit was filed. Not because I expected corruption, but because I've learned never to assume the playing field is level. He looked up at the courthouse behind him, its imposing columns suddenly seeming less intimidating. Judge Peterson called me unqualified because he couldn't understand how someone without his credentials could achieve what I have. That kind of thinking, that success is only legitimate if it follows a prescribed path, is exactly what I've fought against my entire career. As the questions continued, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Sophia standing beside him, pride evident in her eyes. "Ready to go, Dad?" she asked. Michael nodded, then addressed the reporters one final time. The case against Technova was never about stolen technology. It was about fear. Fear of innovation that can't be controlled by the old guard. But innovation, by its very nature, doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for qualification. It simply changes the world and lets history be the judge. With that, Michael Harrington, college dropout, tech visionary, and now vindicated CEO, walked down the courthouse steps with his daughter, leaving behind a judge who had learned too late that true qualification isn't measured by degrees or titles, but by the courage to create something that didn't exist before. 6 months later, Michael stood at the podium in Technova's main auditorium, facing a sea of employees, journalists, and industry leaders. The company's stock had not only recovered, but soared to unprecedented heights, following what the media now called the Peterson scandal. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the company's new initiative, the qualification revolution. "Today," Michael began, his voice carrying through the packed room, "we're launching something more important than any product we've ever created. We're changing how the tech industry defines talent." The audience leaned forward, captivated. Inside the front row sat Sophia, now heading Technova's new ethics and accountability division, a position she'd accepted after witnessing firsthand how power could corrupt even those entrusted with upholding justice. The qualification revolution is a $500 million commitment to identify and nurture unconventional talent. People without degrees, but with brilliant minds. Innovators who don't fit the traditional mold, but who might just change the world, if given the chance. Michael paused, looking out at the faces before him. "But before I explain the details, I want to share what happened to those who tried to destroy what we've built together." The screen behind him changed to show a news headline. "Former Judge William Peterson sentenced to 12 years for corruption, racketeering." Beside it appeared another. "Vortex Tech files for bankruptcy amid scandal. CEO faces federal charges." "I didn't seek revenge," Michael said quietly. "I sought justice, not just for myself or for Technova, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong at the table." The screen changed again, showing images of Judge Peterson being escorted from the courthouse in handcuffs. The man who had once looked down on Michael from the bench now appeared small, defeated, his arrogance replaced by the hollow stare of someone who had lost everything. "William Peterson didn't just lose his judgeship," Michael continued. "He lost his law license, his reputation, and his freedom. The man who questioned my qualifications will now spend the next decade contemplating his own in a federal prison." Michael's tone wasn't triumphant, but reflective. "As for Vortex Tech, the company that bankrolled this attack against us, their stock collapsed when investors learned they had no original technology, only plans to steal ours. Their board has been dissolved, their assets sold off to pay legal settlements." The audience sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of the downfall. "But today isn't about their failure," Michael said, his voice warming. "It's about our future, and the future belongs to those who create, not those who corrupt." He gestured to a group of young people seated to his right, teenagers and young adults from diverse backgrounds, all looking slightly overwhelmed by the attention. "Meet the first cohort of our qualification revolution. 20 brilliant minds who never had the opportunity for formal education, but who possess the spark of innovation that can't be taught in any classroom." One by one, Michael introduced them. A 19-year-old who had built a working quantum computer in her garage. A a former janitor who had developed an algorithm that outperformed MIT's best, a refugee who had created a revolutionary water filtration system using discarded electronics. These individuals will receive full funding, mentorship, and resources to develop their ideas, Michael explained. Not as employees, but as partners. Because Technova isn't just changing who gets a seat at the table. We're building a bigger table. The applause was thunderous. As it subsided, Michael's expression grew more serious. There's one more announcement today. Something personal. The room quieted again. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO of Technova. Gasps rippled through the audience. Sophia straightened in her seat, clearly surprised. Don't worry, Michael smiled. I'm not going far. I'm moving to the newly created position of Chief Innovation Officer, where I'll work directly with our qualification revolution partners, and I'm proud to announce that our new CEO will be Dr. Amara Washington. A woman rose from her seat in the front row, brilliant, composed, with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through merit rather than connections. Dr. Washington started at Technova 15 years ago as a customer service representative while putting herself through night school. She rose through every level of this company, earning her doctorate while developing 3 of our most successful products. There is no one more qualified to lead us into the future. As Dr. Washington joined Michael on stage, the applause was deafening. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The college dropout founder handing the reins to someone who had climbed every rung of the ladder through sheer determination. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Michael found himself alone on the rooftop garden of Technova's headquarters. The city lights stretched before him, much as they had on that dark night 6 months ago when everything seemed lost. Room for one more, Sophia's voice came from behind him. Michael turned, smiling at his daughter. Always. She joined him at the railing. So, Chief Innovation Officer, huh? Was that always the plan? Michael shook his head. No. But when Judge Peterson called me unqualified, it made me question what I really wanted. And I realized I've always been happiest when I'm building, creating, innovating, not managing quarterly reports. Sophia studied him. You know what I think? I think you just qualified yourself for happiness. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Sophia spoke again. Dad, what you did today, changing the company, creating opportunities for people who would never get them otherwise, it matters. It's going to change lives. Michael nodded, thinking of Judge Peterson in his prison cell, of all the doors that had been closed to him throughout his own journey, of the faces of those young innovators who now had a chance he never did. You know, he said finally, when this all started, I wanted to prove Peterson wrong, to show him and everyone else that I was qualified. But I've realized something important. What's that? Sophia asked. Michael looked out at the city, at the empire he had built and was now transforming. It was never about being qualified. It was about being underestimated. Because when people underestimate you, they give you the greatest gift of all, the freedom to redefine what's possible. As father and daughter stood together under the vast night sky, Michael Harrington, innovator, disruptor, and now mentor to a new generation of underestimated dreamers, knew that his greatest qualification had never been what he built, but what he was about to help others build. And that was a legacy no judge, no courtroom, and no critic could ever take away.